Welcome, history and science nerds, to an absolutely epic 40 million year evolutionary journey. Today, we're diving deep into the spectacular rise of the Canidae family. It's a wild story of survival, dramatic climate shifts, and some seriously genius anatomical engineering. Let's jump right in.
Right off the bat, we've got a burning question to answer. How exactly did a tiny, tree-climbing mammal transform into the modern apex predator we know as Canis lupus, the gray wolf? I mean, it sounds like an impossible leap, right? But the fossil record actually gives us a complete step-by-step roadmap of exactly how this happened.
To get our bearings, let's map out our evolutionary timeline. We start roughly 66 million years ago in the Paleocene epoch, right after the dinosaurs checked out. Fast forward about 16 million years to the Eocene epoch, and we see a massive split in the carnivore family tree. Then hit the late Eocene, about 40 million years ago, and the first true early dogs show up. That brings us to the Oligocene, 34 million years ago, when the direct ancestors of our modern canines finally step onto the scene.
Let's kick things off with part 1, the birth of predators, specifically the group known as Carnivoromorpha. You see, once the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct, it was basically free real estate. A whole new world of ecological niches suddenly opened up, just waiting to be claimed.
And one of the critters that sprinted in to claim those niches was Meiosis. Now, Meiosis wasn't just a single direct ancestor, but more of an evolutionary baseline of early, tree-dwelling predators. These guys were super agile and weighed maybe 1 to 7 kilograms. Picture something looking and moving a lot like a modern marten or a civet. They essentially laid the evolutionary foundation for almost all modern carnivore forms.
So, what made them so incredibly successful? Well, it all comes down to their teeth. They were packing an evolutionary Swiss Army knife, a highly specialized dental setup known as the P4 and M1 carnassial complex. Instead of just mashing food together, these teeth function like self-sharpening scissors, perfectly engineered for slicing meat. This structural innovation alone gave them a massive survival edge over other primitive predators.
Moving on to a crucial turning point, the split between Caniformia and Feliformia. About 50 million years ago, this early group of predators hit a massive fork in the road. This is the exact moment when the ancestors of cats and the ancestors of dogs parted ways for good.
Let's look at how these two lineages stack up. If you saw them side by side back then, they'd look practically identical. But here's where the detective anatomy comes in. The Feliformia lineage, heading towards cats, stayed up in the trees and became hypercarnivorous, eating strictly meat. The Caniformia lineage, heading towards dogs, started spending way more time on the ground and adopted a broader, omnivorous diet. But the absolute clincher? The microscopic difference in their ear bones. Feliformia developed a two-chambered auditory bulla with a dividing septum, while Caniformia kept it to a single chamber. That tiny little skull bone permanently defined their wildly different evolutionary paths.
Now, you might be wondering, why did the dog lineage ever leave the safety of the trees in the first place? To get that, we have to talk about the Eocene epoch and climate change, because the shifting environment was the ultimate catalyst for canine evolution.
The climate back then was on a total roller coaster. First, you had the Middle Eocene Climatic Optimum, or MECO, which was this brief, intense period of global warming. But right on its heels came a severe, dramatic global cooling and drying phase. Temperatures absolutely plummeted, and it fundamentally altered the entire landscape of North America.
This cooling triggered a massive domino effect. Step 1. The dense, humid tropical forests blanketing North America began to recede and vanish. Step 2. They were rapidly replaced by open, dry scrublands and wide-open savannas. And step 3. The animals had to adapt. If you're a predator used to hiding in thick leaves and ambushing your prey from a few feet away, you suddenly have a huge problem. Out on the open savanna, your dinner sees you coming from a mile away. Early canids were literally forced out of the trees and had to invent a completely new terrestrial hunting strategy, long-distance endurance pursuit.
Which brings us right to the first true dogs, Hesperocyon. As the world transformed into vast, open plains, a new kind of animal emerged, perfectly engineered to conquer this brand new reality.
Meet Hesperocyon wilsoni, popping up around 40 million years ago down in what's now Texas. This critter is an absolutely crucial morphological bridge. First, it completely lost its third upper molar, the M3 tooth, just to further streamline its meat-shearing abilities. But perhaps even more importantly, it developed a fully ossified and inflated auditory bulla. Out on the open plains, detecting low-frequency sounds over vast distances is literally life or death. That solid, amplified ear chamber gave them the exact radar they needed to survive.
When you look at a direct structural comparison, the evolutionary leap from an early canid like Hesperocyon gregarius to the modern gray wolf Canis lupus is just mind-blowing. The skull length nearly tripled. Look at their posture. Early dogs walked flat on their feet, known as plantigrade, while modern dogs are digitigrade, meaning they run entirely on their toes. Hesperocyon even still had 5 toes on its back foot and retractable claws for climbing. Modern wolves ditched that 5th toe and developed blunt claws for better running traction, fully optimized for covering endless open biomes.
But how exactly did their legs physically change? Well, natural selection quite literally re-engineered them step by step. First, the deltoid crest on the arm bone shrank, ditching all that heavy, useless climbing muscle. Next, the elbow joint locked into a rigid hinge. It couldn't twist outward to grab branches anymore. It could only swing strictly back and forth for running, a motion we call parasagittal movement. Finally, they lost a tiny hole in the ankle bone called the astrogalar foramen. Closing that gap allowed the leg bones to lock together, providing a massive, powerful push-off for endless endurance running.
And once this base running model was perfected, the Canidae family kicked things into overdrive, rapidly diversifying into 3 incredibly distinct evolutionary branches. Let's look at these 3 branches of Canidae.
First up, you have the Hesperocyon. These were the foundational, basal lineage, basically your middle management mesopredators hunting smaller game. Then came the Borophagini. These guys were absolute tanks. They developed massive, bone-crushing jaws and became terrifying apex predators, functioning a lot like modern hyenas. And finally, we have the Canidae branch. This highly adaptable, generalized lineage stems from a tiny, unassuming, fox-like animal called Leptocyon.
What's absolutely fascinating is that the canine branch didn't just evolve their bodies, they seriously upgraded their brains. As they moved into expansive open terrain, they underwent a massive cognitive expansion. Specifically, they developed wrinkled regions in the brain like the cruciate sulcus. This wasn't just about getting generally smarter, this was about processing crazy amounts of real-time spatial information. It allowed them to track fast-moving prey over miles and ultimately coordinate complex, cooperative pack hunting.
Now, there's a huge geographical plot twist to all of this. This entire 40-million-year evolutionary drama wasn't happening all over the globe, which brings us to North America, the isolated dog island.
Believe it or not, the entire Eocene and Oligocene history of dogs is exclusively North American. For millions of years, North America was essentially a gigantic isolated dog island. And this geographical isolation was incredibly lucky. It allowed the Canidae family to experiment, evolve, and perfect their running and hunting adaptations in a closed laboratory, completely safe from the brutal competition of already established Eurasian apex predators.
It wasn't until about 8 million years ago that the descendants of that unassuming Leptocyon lineage finally crossed the Bering Land Bridge, ready to take on Eurasia and eventually conquer the rest of the planet.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound final thought. While those massive, specialized, bone-crushing dogs eventually went completely extinct, the descendants of the small, generalist Leptocyon thrived. How did the adaptable mediocrity of this unassuming animal ultimately become the ultimate survival strategy for the entire dog family? It turns out, being a flexible generalist who's just okay at a lot of things is sometimes the most powerful evolutionary superpower you can have. Think about that the next time you look at your dog. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer of prehistoric evolution, and keep exploring.